Mr. Speaker, House would recall that in the 7th Assembly, when the Committee on Treaties and Protocols was actually created, that it was as a direct consequence of the fact that Nigeria had entered into, at the time, over 200 treaties, protocols, conventions, memoranda of understanding that had not been domesticated. Mr. Speaker, sir, of course, under the Treaties Act, it is very clear that the Ministry of Justice shall be the repository of all the treaties and agreements that have been entered into by the country. And by so, it is assumed that the Ministry of Justice has all these over 200. And Mr. Speaker, so I hear that those treaties have actually grown from 200 in the last House to about 375 in this House. Mr. Speaker, everybody understands the constitutional provision of Section 12(1) that says that no treaty shall have the force of law to the extent, or less to the extent, that it has been domesticated by the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, sir, even where there was ambiguity, it has also been the subject of clarification by the nation's Supreme Court in the case between Gani Fayemi and Abacha, when it was stated, of course, again, that these laws can only have the force of law to the extent that they have a local domestication. Mr. Speaker, sir, my colleague speaks very, very glowingly about the DTAA, the Double Taxation Avoidance Law that was signed, a treaty that was entered into between Nigeria and South Korea. But Mr. Speaker, Nigeria has entered into so many DTAAs with so many other countries, with India, with China, etc., etc. As we live in a world that is constantly without borders, Mr. Speaker, and we speak about doing business, movement of goods, movement of funds between these countries, Mr. Speaker, most countries as we ask for direct investment, most countries before they come into Nigeria will ask one question: what are the taxation laws? Now, the reason that we enter into these double taxation avoidance treaties, Mr. Speaker, is because they give us the opportunity to merge these laws, to look at the areas where we differ from the other countries, and to codify these laws. Mr. Speaker, if we do not do it, there is so much business that is lost to Nigeria. And while we speak to free trade, Mr. Speaker, Nigeria has been unable to balance out her trade because we have not domesticated these laws. Mr. Speaker, let me speak to another treaty that is very dear to your heart, the Treaty on IDPs. Mr. Speaker, Nigeria entered into this treaty, the African Union Treaty on IDPs, since 2009. Mr. Speaker, it has not been domesticated. And here today, we're looking at how to codify a way to deal with internally displaced people. Mr. Speaker, there are so many of these treaties that are lying down with the Ministry of Justice that have not been gazetted, have not been forwarded to the National Assembly. And so we have over 400 treaties. Every time Mr. President goes, he ratifies a treaty on behalf of Nigeria. But the truth of the matter is that every time we engage with ambassadors, the first thing that they say to us as Parliament is that, understanding Section 12(1) of our Constitution, that we have not domesticated these treaties. And it makes Parliament look bad, not knowing that we will do the work if only these treaties are forwarded to Parliament to do the work. So, like my colleague said, and I want to lend my voice to what he said, that we're not imploring the Ministry of Justice, which according to the law and treaties is the repository of these treaties. We are asking them to do their work and without further delay forward to us the gazetted copies of all the treaties, agreements, MOUs that Nigeria has entered into, so that this House can do the work that we must do, so that the people of Nigeria will benefit from these treaties that Nigeria has entered into. I so submit.